825. Move to the left, as Beyonce sings. And the Democratic candidates for mayor are certainly doing that when it comes to stop and frisk. It used to be almost in one voice, other than John Lew, they would say, reform, stop and frisk. Lew always said, eliminate it. Now you have Billy Thompson fighting with Bill de Blasio over who would get rid of stop and frisk in our lifetime. And then yesterday at the West Indian Caribbean Day Parade, I'm looking at Christine Quinn with a glow-in-the-dark orange Revlon hair who had just filed papers that will go to the appellate federal court in opposition to the mayor that she has been in harmony with for close to 12 years of his administration, in which she has said, now, I want the federal monitor now. I want stop and frisk over now. And it needs to be eliminated now. And I'm scratching my head and saying, oh, how times have changed. On the line to discuss it, and this is a place that you go for all your relevant information because they not only break stories, but they flesh out their headlines and give you a lot of background information. DNAinfo.com. If you haven't gone online before, try it. You'll like it. DNAinfo.com. And a guy who's regularly breaking stories and doing commentary for them, Murray Weiss. Thanks for joining us again, Murray.
Good morning, Curtis. Nice to be here.
Murray, we got the battle of the big three Democratic candidates in the mayoral primary, all of them now claiming they would end stop and frisk now. That's Bill de Blasio, Billy Thompson, Christine Quinn. I scratched my head and seemed to remember 6 months ago they all wanted to reform it, not end it. Did they think that people were just stupid?
Well, you know, it's an amazing thing that the stop and frisk issue, it seems to me, has become certainly the lead issue in this mayoral campaign. And each one in their, as they get closer to the primary, they're all trying to move and nuance their positions so that they can obviously get the most votes in the initial primary run to see if they can either not have a runoff and win or become, one of the two people who get into the runoff.
Well, for instance, in the case of Bill de Blasio, who's leading in the polls, he at least 6 months ago said if given the opportunity of being mayor, he'd invite Bill Bratton to return as police commissioner. That was Rudy Giuliani's first commissioner. But Bill Bratton has used stop and frisk, and actually Christine Quinn has said she would ask Police Commissioner Kelly, although recently she called him rogue. What kind of a person, if any of these folks happen to get elected, might they now have to choose because they'd want a prohibition against stop and frisk?
Honestly, it's hard to imagine the type of person that they would choose. They would have to get somebody who I think would either still be in law enforcement but would have such a soft view of what policing should be, meaning a reversal of the kind of policing that we've had in New York for probably the past 2 decades. And actually, one could argue that the decades before that, the police wanted to be more aggressive in their police tactics, but they felt very handcuffed by either politics or the lack of resources or the courts. Or they have to pick somebody who is a civilian. As you know, Curtis, the police commissioner's job actually is a civilian position. The police department here in 1980 had Robert McGuire, who was an attorney and the son of actually a former police chief, but he was strictly a civilian. Since then, we've had police commissioners who all had law enforcement backgrounds. They'd have to pick somebody who was completely not from the law enforcement or police-oriented universe. They could choose a federal prosecutor, former federal prosecutor, to become the commissioner. They could pick a Loretta Lynch, who might send this terrific signal to the public. Obviously, she's African-American. She is a very, well-respected United States attorney here. She also prosecuted the Abner Louima case, among others. I mean, they could choose people outside of the police world like Bill Bratton. But certainly, I don't think anybody who becomes the police commissioner of the city of New York can run the police department without seeing the value of and keeping some form of stop and frisk. The amazing thing here in New York is that the administration that we currently have, with Police Commissioner Kelly and Mike Bloomberg, that after 20 years of continual declines in New York, to a point, where 20, 30 years ago it was unthinkable. I know when you started the Guardian Angels, the city was completely awash in crime. I mean, people were too terrified to wear jewelry in the subways. It's unimaginable today, but it's hard to imagine that they could have a complete, have law enforcement and policing without some sort of component of stop and frisk.
Well, back then, there was no such thing as stop and frisk. Let's take that year, defining year 1979. A cop would say, yeah, we had to toss a suspect, Sarge, which is almost the equivalent of stop and frisk. How was it different back then when you didn't have the terminology? Because I would oftentimes see cops roll up on people on the corner, throw them up against the wall, search them down, and then tell them that it was time for them to leave the area, and made no arrests whatsoever, but just they basically toss and turn a suspect or a group that was meandering on the corner.
I think the police back in the day, so to speak, in that day, and even before that, they had wide-ranging latitude. And I'm not necessarily saying that was a good thing, but they could roll up on people and do pretty much what they wanted. But I think at that time, if you think back, although the department was very small then, very small, but the community relations, the people who lived in minority communities really felt that the police were, an invading army. What happened in the 80s, and right before they really, the department really changed under Bill Bratton, the department had a cadre of cops, the street crime people, who were very tightly controlled, very highly trained, and those people did the bulk of the stop and frisking, and they really did the people. They really could tell who was carrying the weapons, and it was a very effective unit till it expanded, and then they had some problems because the training levels diminished. And I think that's analogous to today, is that the department has so many young cops, and the department's policy has been so aggressive on stopping and frisk that you have like a perfect storm of bad things. You have a policy of stop and frisk is okay, go do it, we need the numbers. It seems to be a tool that's working for us, but you're doing it with thousands of police officers who have very limited experiences, and I think those two things came together and created a situation where some communities felt that everybody's getting stopped and frisked. Hey, I'm a college kid going to school. I've been stopped 5 times now in the past year. When am I allowed to walk down my street and not get harassed? And I think that's what's put us in the position we're in.
Murray Weiss, the most recent headline that has galvanized all attention was the shooting and the killing of the 16-month-old baby boy in Brownsville. His father wheeling him in the baby stroller, shots ring out. The father all of a sudden is taking the code of omerta, the code of the street. Snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. What can you tell us about that shooting, and who is this father that wouldn't even cooperate in trying to resolve the killing of his own baby boy?
Curtis, this story, it shows you how complicated police work can be in dealing with, the public. And the public, runs the gamut of all kinds of people. Here you have a case where, as you point out, gunfire, obviously the father's the target, but his background, he's bought into the gang philosophy. He's reputedly a member of gangs, and his first instinct is the gang loyalty, the gang philosophy, even in the face of the loss of his own child, walking down a street, pushing his kid in a stroller. I mean, on one hand, that evokes the most serene type of New York scene. Young father walking young child in a baby stroller. And yet there's this whole dynamic surrounding it. And it speaks to all the issues that the police have to confront. Gangs, crime in tough neighborhoods, controlling guns so that the gangs or criminals don't have them in their hands. The world of policing is a complicated bit of business, and they show up to a scene, got a baby shot, you're going to have witnesses, and the father himself should be cooperating, and yet it's exactly the opposite. So in many ways, this case really illustrates the component, the things that the police department, and actually to Bloomberg's credit, with the gun issue, that the things that they have to and try to address and meet tremendous frustrations.
Well, it's interesting because everyone obviously stopped and paused yesterday at the West Indian Caribbean Day Parade, all the politicos running for citywide office, whether it was for the mayor, public advocate, city controller. But they didn't do anything more than pause and express sorrow for the loss of the baby boy. But now with all these new revelations in which the police department is stymied. In fact, this one community activist, Murray Weiss, is saying, what should have happened was this guy should have just capped the father. Huh? Encouraging beefs to be settled in the streets at gunpoint. And you say to yourself, why don't you comment on that, those of you who would like to lead us in the future with all these new restrictions that you're going to impose on the police department. But they don't have any knowledge of the streets. They don't go into places like Brownsville. They rarely go in to campaign. There's not that many votes that come out of that area. So they basically stay quiet themselves.
Well, I can't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, these cases are the ones that show how troubling things can be in certain parts of this city, and how thorny and difficult and nuanced the issues are to deal with, to correct, to prevent. And the people who want to be the mayor, these are the kind of issues that you can't just wave your magic wand, Froggy, and the whole world changes. And this case is the timing of it is pretty interesting, and it really illustrates, on one hand, the realities that the candidates are going to face, whoever is the winner. That talking about certain, changing stop and frisk or doing away with it, these are the realities of our city.
Oh, One last quick question. Every year at the West Indian Caribbean Day Parade, it's almost like two parades. The parade for those older folks, middle-aged folks, like 11 to 1:30, which you have the politicians, the social groups, the unions, the religious people, and then the young people take it over afterwards. And there's always violence, stabbing, shootings, all kinds of crazy behavior. It's got to make the life of a cop absolutely mind-boggling to know there's two sets of rules and regulations. You behave a certain way when the politicians are there, and then you basically have to do what you have to do to control sometimes an out-of-control population of young males running the streets late in the day.
Yes, it's the Caribbean Parade, has always been, or it has been, a little difficult for the police. It is, on one hand, you have tens and tens of thousands of people who are really well behaved, having a great old time, and then there's a component to it, and the police have to deal with those people a certain way. But years ago, when the parade had a lot of violence attached to it after or toward the end of it, the police posture they had a lot of police presence there. So now they're given the impression that they're there, again, not to use an invading police force, but on one hand, you have to be the nice police officer who's just standing there part of the parade, and then you have to also have a really stern show of force to ensure that the parade remains completely safe and that the level of violence after it is very low. And this year, there was an incident or two, but this was a fairly peaceful day out there yesterday.
Appreciate that, Murray Weiss. Check him out, DNAinfo.com. That's the place that you go for all breaking information, news and commentary, DNAinfo.com.